Okay, thank you very much for having us. I know you setting up with Matthew the computers, so we can go first with Natalia. As you can see, Natalia and Natalia, the two Natalia you see on screen, are in Colombia, and it's very early there, so we need to appreciate that. Thank you very much. So we are at the second conversation. We go basically ahead as the same as we did the same way last Friday. We let the two speakers going first, and then we have a conversation as much as possible. I'm not going to talk a lot on presenting the speakers, but we have two alumni, Natalia Child and Natalia Mosquera, which had did the BAT course in two different moments, 2015 and 2019, if I remember correctly. And now they came back to Colombia, and they founded an NGO, a practice that works in through participatory and horizontal processes to look and work with vulnerable community around the notion of inclusion. And I think it's very interesting because I met them recently in Colombia several months ago, and we had a very interesting chat. And that's why some of their project they are working is very interesting on developing new forms of methodologies. And I think today, again, one of the questions is around methodologies. So I'm not taking over too much time, so I'll pass the microphone to Natalia. You guys goes ahead as much as you want. I know that you have some issues, so maybe we can take it from there. If you have the screen to share, maybe you can do it, and I'll stop myself. And thank you for being so early with us. Okay.
Hi, thank you for sharing your screen now.
Here it is. We can see it, so off you go.
Okay. Okay, that's great. So first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. It's really an honor to be here, to be part again of BOT in a sense. So we are going to share our approach to urban design with BOT, and to several projects we've done that can relate to urgency methodology and diffractions. And of course, everything is based on our work in contested territories, Colombia, and
Natalia, sorry to
how we develop autonomy in habitat and territory management throughout the country.
Natalia.
So this is just to share a little bit how we're gonna do it. We're not gonna do it in chronological order. We're gonna share 3 chapters of our life. Yeah, sure. Yes.
Natalia, can you hear me? Your voice.
Can hear you.
Yes, we can, but it's really broken. Can you try again?
Can you hear us a little bit better?
Yeah, way better. Thanks.
Okay, no. Okay, we figure it out. Just give us a second.
Yeah.
1 minute. No, solo uno. Okay, yeah. Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So our work, we're gonna present it in contested territories in Colombia, and we're gonna share to you, like in a non-chronological order, in 3 chapters of our lives. The bot chapter, then our work in contested territories, and then our job with our NGO. So we'll start from bud. I know many of you students have now asked yourselves, like, how are we going to apply all those Foucault theories and all of the readings you've done? And that's a question that we had, and that we tried to develop at the end of our masters. But basically, what bot taught us, okay, so yeah, as Camilo told us, I'm Natalia Child, I went in 2019, Natalia Mosquera in 2015. And for both of us, it was an amazing experience. And why are we including this chapter in our lives? Again?
I think it's okay.
Yeah, it's
Okay. Okay.
It's good.
So because it's really important for us, because before that, we were working in different contexts in the private sectors, and we had like a different approach to what we wanted to do in life. And what changed for us was the approach to the problematics in our country, and like what we wanted to do. So basically, we have two first points that of what Bud taught us about. First, the flexibility to adapt in different contexts, to work in urgent conditions, and to apply different methodologies that work in the circumstances that we were. And the second of all is understanding the complexity of each situation, including the actors, all of the forces, the economic and political conditions, and how all of these intertwine with each other. So basically, we left with this huge challenge of coming back to Colombia and applying all of our new knowledge, and figuring out what we wanted to do.
And so here is to understand the context in which we work. It's important to know that we work in contested territories, as we call them. And for some of you that don't know, Colombia has been like with an internal conflict for over 70 years, more or less 78 years, that started as a fight between two political parties, the liberal and conservative. And then by the 60s, the two main guerrilla groups were created in the rural areas as an inconformity with policies and the government. But with the surge of drug trafficking, their political views were like infected, and they gained more military presence, more money, more presence around the territories. And as our country is very rough, they were able to gain more power. By 2005, they had the most power in all over the country, but the increased military actions made or caused a decrease in the amount of violence. And by 2016, a peace agreement was signed with the biggest guerrilla group, that was FARC. But with them gone out of the territory and out of the drug trafficking as an actor, other groups took their places, and ELN and dissident group, criminal bands and drug cartels are taking over, and we're still trying to eradicate that. That's mainly in the rural areas, but permeating everything.
So that short history of Colombia is so you can understand the importance of when we entered, both of us, to work at the presidency of the Republic in Colombia in 2016, especially in the presidential advisory for the early childhood. We entered because we were implementing a new public policy, which was named De Cero a Siempre, which translates from zero to always. And basically, this public policy was a set of actions that were planned across the national territory, that were promoting and guaranteeing the development of girls and boys during the early childhood. This means from 0 to 5 years old, through an intersectoral work. This was like the first time in Colombia that this was done, and that there was like a focus on the early childhood, so it was very important. And there were three main events, that three main things that were great. So first, it broke the paradigm of a single entity responsible for the early childhood, and it was really an intersectoral work. Second, it assumed the comprehensive protection of children with an ethical and action framework. And third, it established the integral development during the early childhood as the ultimate goal of the policy. So we entered the advisory to work there. This was actually one of the towns we visited. We visited almost all of the national territory. During the process, there were constant dialogue. So this was before the peace agreement, but before the peace signature, but the peace agreement was already in the territories. People were talking about it. So, for example, this was a town that was very affected by drug trafficking. And if you can see the signs, the top sign says, "No to eradication of the coca leaf, yes to peace, yes to the agreements, and yes to a gradual and concerted crop substitution." So it was very important, the dialogues that were happening in the national territory. And within the presidential advisory, there was a small group. We were like 8 architects. That was called a Plan Padrino, and there, like where we worked. So what the Plan Padrino did was that we formulated, we designed, and we led the execution of all the child development centers in the regions of Colombia that had the biggest gaps in integral education for the early childhood, and where the most vulnerable population were located. So if you see Colombia in the first map, bottom left, its population density is based, most of it in the northwestern part of the country, and then there's a very small density on the southeastern part of the country. Of course, everything has to do with the complicated geography in the southern part of the country. If you see the second map, that's the internal conflict impact, which, as you can see, there's a huge portion on the, let's say, south, like mid-south part of the country, and then in some regions as the Pacific and the close border to Venezuela. And if you match it with a multi-dimensional poverty index, you see that there's like in the most vulnerable parts of the country are where the less people live. So what we did in the Plan Padrino is that we matched all of these maps, and we formulated the child development centers in the regions that mostly needed it, and where the children from 0 to 5 years old were less integrated, let's say, to the educational programs of the country. And that's how we got on the right. That's where we worked when we were in the presidency, and that's where we built child development centers. So these are some of the places we went to. Of course, there's complicated geography to reach them. The access were really, like, sometimes we had to travel for 1 or 2 days in different ways of traveling, and all of them have different cultures, have different histories, and
ethnic backgrounds.
yeah, ethnic backgrounds. And of course, they have a history with, well, with the country itself, very, very complicated. Some of them we went to and they didn't even felt part of Colombia, so that was really like a shock. And we wanted to do things very differently, and we knew we needed to understand each context so we could apply our best methodologies in it. So basically, what we did was that we developed a methodology that was named Usted, that it's the translation for you, but because it had 3 important things. So U for user, T for tradition, and E for ecology. This methodology, basically, what it meant is that the user was the central part of it. So the communities in the territories were going to be what we most prioritized, and we wanted to engage with them throughout participatory design workshops. We wanted to know their concerns. We wanted to also establish some responsibilities for the community, so they had a sense of belonging with the new infrastructures that we're gonna make. And we, of course, wanted to understand and enhance the local culture. In the tradition, we focused on understanding their local traditions, the vernacular processes that were made throughout the years in their infrastructures, and we also wanted to generate employment so that we can include them in the process of building these child development centers. And with ecology, we wanted it was actually like the first time in Colombia that in this type of infrastructure, the bioclimatic and the environmental characteristics of a place were included, well, in the public sector, of course, to build different types of infrastructure that were made for that specific place. So they were context-based. So we also identified the natural resources we could use and implement sustainable design and technologies. And we had 4 main moments of participatory work process. First, starting, we did the first design workshop. We met the community and we involved everyone from the little kids from 0 to 5 years old to everyone in the community in the design workshop. After that, we went to the office and we worked on what we got. And then we went back to socialize the first designs of the child development center, and we would kickstart the project. After that, at the 50% of the project progress of construction, we would do another socialization project. So we would invite the community and make them go around the construction site and just hear their opinions, if they were thinking it was everything great, and well, yeah, just hear them out. And then at the end, we had like a project competition workshop where we would share our experiences. We would hear them if they would be happy or what were their feelings.
Here it's important to know that these are the moments that we were able to set in a public sector framework.
Exactly.
So it's not that we think this is the perfect participatory process, but
No.
it was something.
Yeah, it was
And
like the
we'll
best we could
explain
do.
it later.
And between 2012 and 2018, there were more than 40 great infrastructure projects that we built. Some of them have architectural prizes, but like the quality of these infrastructures was great, and the communities were very happy with those. And at the end, well, like the government ended, and some of these processes that were in the middle of construction ended as well. So why is this important? Because we worked in very different territories, in territories where there was an urgency to approach to the early childhood. There was a huge expectation from the community, and also coming from the public sector. It's very important for us to analyze how the work was done. So we just wanted to like to share with you our analysis. And well, the good part of it is that it was really the first time that it was a methodological innovation around participation within the public sector at this scale, like at this national scale, that it really comprehended the whole national territory. It included forgotten communities. It prioritized affected population groups, especially the early childhood, and it also had generous budget. So we basically received funds from several national and international and like foreign investment countries for the development of children. And what that permitted is that it could give us a generous budget to build and to, for example, travel to these, and that also translated in great quality infrastructures. We are gonna see also this has like a bad part, but this is a good one. It also guaranteed the operation thanks to the articulation of different government actors. As I said at the beginning, it was an intersectoral work, and that showed because you had also the happiness that at the end of the project it was going to be used by the communities. And it also created new opportunities for the families of the children involved, because they were involved in the construction. Then afterwards, when the child development centers started working, they were also involved working there.
And the bad stuff is there was lack of political will from majors and governmental entities and municipalities that made some of the localities that we wanted to target not being able to access them or to put the resources into their territories. There's a complicated geography, so there are almost unreachable territories, mostly on the Amazonian and Orinoco parts of Colombia that are on the east. You see the part in the map where there were no spots. They are unreachable from the public sector and to make infrastructure because there are no roads. So everything must be taken by plane or by boat. So it makes it very expensive to build. There was a tokenistic participation approach, maybe just to count that you did the workshop and you went in the 50% of advancement of the construction, and then at the end. So there was that, and also very short times to make the workshops. So you have to be there one day and then the next day go back to Bogota. There was other actors that participated in the construction and made the execution times very short. So there was 3-month execution time, 6 months, and it's very difficult to build something with good quality like that. And bureaucracy and the participation of many governmental actors, all with different processes and standards that made difficult, for example, to use some materials as wood and other natural materials because they were not as permanent as concrete, for example. And also centralization at the end, because the country's development is always taught from the center and not prioritizing sometimes the particularities of the territory of the territory. But this, in this case, because of the urgency and the the urgency to build and to finish them in a period of time. So with that in mind, we left the presidency because there was a change of government. We worked in other public sector places and other NGOs. And those are other experiences that have permeated how we think, but we're not going to talk about that during this presentation because it would be too long. But in 2020, we decided to create NUDO with the purpose of becoming a transformative and innovative agent in the Colombian civil society, and with all of the processes that we had before in mind, like trying to do something different and more in a more autonomous way. Here we explain how we work. These methodologies, not ours, is a construction based on the analysis and research of several methodologies like PAR and Acción Sin Daño and other specific things, but it is comprised of 3 moments: analysis, collective construction, and legitimation, that it repeats like in a loop of reflection and work every time, and with the purpose of create a systemic change, and not a superficial one, but contribute to the change of Colombia from deep, and focus in participation, action, and research. We actually first analyze the context, define the objectives and the work plan, and then we go to the places where we work with the communities and do some knowledge exchange with what we know from books and internet and what we can find, and what they know and they experience from their own in their communities. Then we go back because our main place of settlement is Bogota, and adjust and complete the work plan and activities. And then we go back to co-product with them based on what we have learned from each other and some activities we have created. Then we go back to analyze and reformulate based on what we've seen. And then we go back to co-product. This loop can be done as many times as needed. And then we consolidate the information and close the processes, and then legitimation and feedback. This could be endless, but there are limitations in time and budget that we need to have in mind and to follow. But this is how we try to work, and this because we have also understand that the process of working or in an horizontal way with communities and with people is very changeable, and it changes all the time. And with every moment you discover new things and you have to reformulate and
adapt.
Adapt.
Yeah.
Yes, the main word for this is adaptability of the circumstances, but because you plan something and sometimes
Most of the time it doesn't go as planned.
as planned.
So we're going to talk about two relevant projects we've done with our NGO. We chose them because, of course, they touch a lot about the topics we're talking about today. So the first one was called the Vivas project, that translates to alive in like women alive. And it was done with the IOM and the Swedish Corporation. And what it was an implementation of a gender-based violence prevention plan to promote the autonomy of the FARC women in transition to civilian life. So we're going to explain to you a little bit more about history in our country. But so as an urgent measure to place the guerrilla combatants that wanted to reintegrate to the civilian life, the Peace Commission in 2018 and the government of Colombia created a new concept that was the ETCR. The ETCR is a territorial training and reincorporation space. What was this about? So they were created, it was a physical territorial space where there was going to happen like a training, education, and early reintegration activities for the members of the FARC that wanted to leave the war and adapt to civilian life. So the ETCR, we had at the beginning a duration of 24 months, and then they had to end, like they had to leave that place and go back to civilian life in any of the cities, well, they wanted in Colombia. So the idea here to explain to you in detail was the guerrilla members that wanted to leave the war were going to go to these different places that were around all of Colombia. There they were going to have training, and then they were going to leave this place and just go back to the urban and rural spaces of Colombia. What happened? Something completely different. So the status ended in August 15 of 2019. And what happened is that people didn't leave those spaces, and they became the permanent solution for former combatants. So basically, these spaces were just permanent. These are 24 zones in Colombia, and they just became permanent and now are like new towns. So if you, I mean, this is really, really interesting because you can see these are new territorial places where there was nothing. And then these people that haven't lived civilian life, most of them in all of their life, they have 30, 40 years and they don't know what is to live in a specific place because they were walking throughout Colombia all of their lives for war. So they come to these places and now they're going to start a life. They're going to be autonomous, let's say, in this territory, but they also have to adapt to the laws of civilian life. So they were very like disconnected from the reality. They had to learn a lot about very different things. That's when the IOM will calls us and tells us to do some workshops, because some of these communities want to build different types of infrastructures, but of course they want to know to use their knowledge. And well, that's when we go into these new places. We work specifically in two places. One in, if you can see, in the south of the country, in a place that's called Caquetá, and then the other one in the north. So this project, the purpose of this project was to strengthen the local capacities of the women that were in the process of reincorporation to civilian life within the participatory design of physical spaces, of two infrastructures that were associated with care spaces and economic empowerment initiatives. So these two infrastructures that were going to be built were also going to be used by the women, so they can, for their livelihoods, basically. Here we used two, let's say, a main methodology and an ethical approach that for us was very important. The methodology we used, it's called collective knowledge. It's developed by some group of architects that are very close to us, and it's a dynamic construction that adapts in the context that we are, and in the work between the inhabitants of the place and the technical team. So it's based also in the moments and actions in the field and in the office, and how these relate. And for us, it was really important, and we told the community also about it, the ethical approach of action without harm, that I think it's actually called no harm, because it implies a moral obligation in general. And basically, it's a principle in which we're not going to impact negatively the community which we're working with. So the product in this case, in this project, was two small guides, let's say, of design, in which we put all the conclusions of the collective work sessions we had. We only visited the site, each of the territories, twice. These, of course, were guidelines of the IOM. And in these two visits, we did all of the participatory design methodological programs that we had. And also, we included the architectural proposal that was built with the knowledge that they had, the ecological and natural resources that they had in the territories that they could use, some bioclimatic observations that we wanted them to have, and some materials that they could use. At the end of these, well, we're going to talk about the good and the bad also afterwards, but this project had a stage 2 that couldn't be done because of the bad management, let's say, of the entities that planned it. So our work was just finished with these products, and afterwards we talked a lot with the communities, but not very much has been done.
And so during 2022 and 2023, we began to work with this community in the south of Colombia around new narratives of territorial management and around the lenses of climate change, gender, and intersectionality. This project is done with the community, with the indigenous community called Awa. The Awa are the people of the mountain and the people of the forest. They are located in the southwest of Colombia, in that corner that limits with Ecuador. And they are from the municipality of Ricaurte, and they have a natural reservation that is called La Planada. They, from 2010, they are in charge of the territory, and they gain the ownership of the territory, and they have been building theirs and strengthening their leadership around it, because it was before run by another NGO, and they were just workers of them. So this project was founded by GRIP, that is a project based on gender, intersectionality, and climate change, and it groups UCL and another UK universities, and with the funds of the UK government. So the project aimed to contribute to the consolidation of La Planada by strengthening the sustainability of these unique conditions in the territory. This was achieved by doing some analysis of the territory and using two main lenses that, as I said before, were climate change and intersectionality. In this case, gender and the ethnicity focus. We organized the process around 5 stages. One was recognition, and it was meant to co-produce knowledge about the territory, the place, and the community with them. Then the second stage was to analysis and consolidation. So it was to systematize and study the information obtained. Then the stage 3, that it was learning. So it was an exchange and experiential analysis of the technical knowledge between them that were the residents of the reservation and us as professionals with some technical knowledge that maybe they didn't have, but they had another knowledge about weather, when it rained, how were the crops, the sun when it come out, when, all those things that we that are from another region don't know. Stage 4, it was structuring and the development plan and the application of the guide and the contents. And at stage 5, as we said before, it was a legitimation and feedback from the community. So the product of this research on this work was a guide. It was a guide based on autonomy in territory and habitat management. And it wanted to create collective construction of knowledge with an intersectional and climate change focus around the Planada. The guide was aimed at the members of La Planada, both leaders, male and female leaders, members of La Planada, employees of La Planada, and the groups of men and women working on the scientific and nature tourism project. To the future generations of our indigenous people that are the most important agents of change and are going to be in charge of the decisions in La Planada, and to indigenous Black and peasant communities in Colombia and Latin America that wanted to apply the methodology and the activities from result from this process. Well, in adapting them to their specific conditions and their specific territories. So the guide had 2 parts. The part 1 was the practical tools, activities, and recommendations. So this part was meant for everybody. It's like a cookbook of participatory activities that are based on 4 modules, from recognition of the sites until module 4, that is preparation for execution and work, because we identified that many of the communities don't know how to read plans, don't know how to understand the technical parts of that are related to infrastructure, don't know how to build a budget, don't know how to start if they want to decide or prioritize stuff to do in their communities. So this guide and this part sets some steps to do it with small infrastructures, nothing too complicated, but to be able to do it. And it looks like this. It has activities, notes, and things to take into account if you are like doing the process with a community or from the community. And the part 2 was the account of the process and the application of those methodologies and tools in that specific context of La Planada. So here we're going to see more or less how it looks. It has a module 1 that is recognition, so it goes back telling about the places that we visited, doing transect walks around the trails that they have to show to the tourist, and notes around it, things that have to be done in some specific points, and those were all talked with them, and it came by for them and by them. It has the planning process, so a prioritization of the infrastructures that are going to be needed, intervention in time, the most important and the less important. The module 3 that is based on design, so some of the process of participatory design, to know some specific aspects of how they build, why they build like that, traditionally and from centuries they have been building in that way, and why is that, from their knowledge, and some other activities of exchange that with the designs we made to create some bridges, meeting points, walks, and other infrastructures we created from our office, some models at a bigger scale to be able to play with them and to understand different materials and forms of construction that were very specific to these territories. For example, it's very rainy and very humid, so you need to take into account that you don't sleep while you walk, things that we don't think about because we are in a different context completely. And with that, we created the final designs. This is a simple one that we wanted to share, but there are more complicated ones, and made all with the knowledge of them. And we wanted to show you, just to end, a little video of,
Well, yeah,
our
this, and then
experience.
we'll have our conclusions.
Yeah.
El territorio para el pueblo Agua como tal es nuestra vida. La concebimos de esta manera porque en él está la vida, en él están nuestros usos y costumbres, toda nuestra cultura, y además pues toda la consideramos como la madre tierra, porque a ella le debemos mucho.
Este proyecto nace a partir de la necesidad y la importancia de que las comunidades indígenas, comunidades negras, comunidades campesinas y comunidades rurales puedan autogestionar su territorio y cuenten con las herramientas necesarias para construir ellos mismos las infraestructuras pequeñas que pueden aportarle al crecimiento de sus territorios y al desarrollo de los mismos. Nuestro equipo de arquitectos viene a trabajar horizontalmente con ellos para construir en conjunto estas nuevas infraestructuras y dar esa hoja de ruta para el crecimiento de la planada de aquí a unos años.
La manera de gestionarlo es buscar las formas de poder sobrevivir, pero a la vez no hacerle daño a nuestro medio ambiente, ¿no?
Las metodologías permiten replicarse respetando contextos, culturas, tipos de poblaciones, y hace que la transferencia que se haga sea netamente metodológica. Es replicable a otros contextos, no solo etnias indígenas, sino también comunidades campesinas y otro tipo de comunidades.
Tenemos unos sueños para que nuestra reserva siga adelante y queremos nosotros que esta reserva pues en el tiempo, más en 2 años, puede ser mejor todavía.
Okay, so to end, we wanted to have a little bit of a discussion, and we would love that at the end you could also well, ask or make your comments. But basically our practice as an NGO throughout these 4 years we've tried to have a non-traditional approach to decentralize the opportunities that territories have around the country. And we've tried to involve a lot of negotiation, be flexible, be adaptable to each context. But this has also led us to a lot of questions. Like, for example, here in urgent contexts in Colombia, where there's a lot of things to be done, where there's a lot of communities that need urgent help, like really who is in charge? Like in territory control, as we've seen in the IOM project, who is really in charge? Who is going to lead these communities? Who's going to help them without imposing and like liberating them in the sense that's negative, right? And we've come to really interesting discussions, like how we could also, as an NGO, I remember very well during BOD, I read um, a part of the NGOization of space by Haim Jacobi, and it stated the question of how can they really challenge the power structure, and that's really have been in our mind doing this for years because we've tried to challenge how things are done. But that gets us to our thoughts that we try to write here. So first, expectation versus reality. Are we as an NGO really independent actors? And that's really sad to say, but at the end, we're not. So although we've tried, we've been flexible with our methodologies, we've tried to do things different ways. At the end of the way, we depend on the person or the institution that is paying us basically, and that has written the project itself, or the donor at the end of the way. And that's really sad, and we're going to continue like looking for ways to do our things differently. But it's really different to be an independent actor and a neutral actor here. In terms of sustainability of habitat development practices, we also have seen that's very difficult to really like make a project sustainable in time. Let's say, as we've seen in the IOM and also in the last one here in La Planada, there's a lot of resources that need to be implemented so a project can be sustainable. And it's very sad that some of the really great initiatives that we have, because we've worked in some, are just cut off because of budget or because of bad planning of different actors.
Yeah, so that's why we came to the conclusion that one of the points of the solutions is autonomy of the communities, that they don't depend of NGOs on or anyone to be able to manage their territory or to understand the processes. And they need to, I think knowledge is the solution for them to be able to sustain through time and to be able to not depend, and to make our work just an interchange of knowledge and like an access at some points, but not a permanent solution for them to be able to resist or to be.
We've seen here that just by recognizing some communities' history and their struggles, they by themselves enter in this practice of like of an emancipatory self practice, if you will, of really going forward. But also this has a negative part of the autonomy, is that we've seen that these processes need much more guidance and physical presence from the technical teams that you can plan. So although they're doing their process by themselves, they do need a lot more focus. They need more physical guidance. And as you know, in Colombia, the geographic and the territory itself, it's really difficult to invest in the travels we have to make to go to these communities. So some of these projects only have 2-3 visits and that's it. And that breaks a really interesting bond that could be made if we could continue going to the territories much more. Our fourth point is that positionality is key. That's one of our greatest conclusions. For us, like one of the aspects we're really proud of without being arrogant or anything is that we've created trust and bonds, and we've established really interesting relationships with the communities we've worked with. And this has been thanks to our reflection and our positionality that we've communicated with these communities, where we don't go to impose or steal their ideas, but we work sharing our knowledge and learning from each other constantly. And I think this is key for specifically in urgent contexts where you really need to create trust with the communities in a fast environment.
And
Thank you, Natalia.
Yeah.
I think we need to stop. Sorry, because we need to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
it.
you. Thank you very much. Can you stop the presentation so we let? I'm sure everybody
Thank
can
you.
comment. Thank you very much. And now the sun is rising, so it's also nice. Thank you very much. We are a little bit conscious of time, so we'll come back with some of the question. Matthew, I'll leave the floor directly to you. I know it's a little bit late, but let me just thank everybody. Natalia, you were absolutely fantastic in pointing some of the urgent question, both methodologically and not. And I'm sure that Matthew would definitely come to some of the connections and similar conclusion. And I'm very happy to Matthew accepted to come. I know Matthew is very busy with millions of other things, but his own experience as professor of planning and urban design at the Bartlett in planning department and elsewhere, with a kind of a longer research on the governance of urban design. So the urban design as a method, as a tool of governance, but also as the reflection on value, I think are substantially interesting, though going maybe across a numbers of different territories and reflection. So Matthew, thank you very much for your time, and I owe you something to drink as soon as possible. So thank you, and I leave you the floor to you, and then to engage with what is left in the time to for the conversation. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Fantastic. All right.
Thank you very much. Off to you.
Okay. So yeah, I'm going to talk about research that has a very long gestation period. In fact, it's been a journey that I've personally been on for some 30 years or so. When I first became fascinated with how governments sort of intervene to shape better quality built environments, and then signed up to do a PhD to explore those issues when these issues were called design control here in the UK. And my PhD and much of the work that I did in the first 10 years of my academic career is now largely forgotten, apart from by me. But the sort of ideas and the interests that began in that time have continued, if you like, to inform my work ever since. And notably, they inform work that I led from 2013 to 2017 that examined the history, approaches and impacts of an influential but now defunct English organisation called the Commission for Architecture and the Built Environment, or CABE, which was at the time the UK government's advisor on design and design quality between 1999 and 2011. And in that research, urban design governance, which is the subject of my talk today, was defined as state-sanctioned intervention in the means and processes of designing the built environment in order to shape both processes and outcomes in a defined public interest. Now, that work, with its focus on the UK, caught the eye of Frédéric Saliers of UN Habitat, and resonated with conversations that he was having at the time with colleagues in the European Commission. And 6 months later, the conversations, which now included myself and colleagues from the Brussels Bouwminister, which is like the state architect of Brussels, led to an EU-funded project called Urban Maestro. And that project began in 2019 and culminated in April last year with a new book called Urban Design Governance, from which I will draw liberally over the next 45 minutes or so. Now, if my personal journey, my personal research journey has been long, it's nothing compared with the provenance of the subject that I've been exploring. So Europe, of course, has a long history of urbanisation, first cities dating back 8,000 years or so, while the sort of formal means of decision making used to shape those very early settlements is sort of lost in the mist of time, it's highly likely that from the earliest times some form of control was enacted on where and how people were allowed to build. Some of the earliest actually recorded controls were the reforms of Solon the lawgiver from around 600 BC in ancient Greece. And these included guidelines for the spacing and placement of everything from houses to walls to ditches to even beehives. Ancient Rome similarly had its own regulations, including one of the very first aesthetic regulations that forbade the demolition of buildings in the countryside, because wealthy Romans who lived there didn't like the view of the ruins that were being left behind, so perhaps some early NIMBYs there. Medieval Europe also had its controls over what we now call urban design. The first Lord Mayor of London, for example, introduced an assize of building in 1189 to encourage the construction of buildings in brick as a defence against the fire. Unfortunately, the Great Fire of 1666 showed that that wasn't particularly effective. Although on the positive side, it did lead to the London Building Act of 1667, which eventually gave rise to the particular look and feel of this part of London, Bloomsbury. Those set of regulations led directly to the types of buildings that we see around here. During the 20th century and into the 21st century, new policy positions and associated regulations multiplied, as we know, alongside a greater willingness and expectation that the public sector could and should intervene to shape the built environment in a broad public interest. And a case in point was zoning, which had its origins, interestingly, in Napoleonic France. Here's Napoleon with his zoning tablet, before spreading to Germany, and from there to the United States, and from there around the world, warts and all. Today, there is a sort of wide range of public interest motivations and aspirations that are apparent for intervening in the design of development. And these diverse motivations have in various ways been sort of written into the public policy agendas of the multiplicity of different governance regimes that help to shape the European built environment. They demonstrate that what is meant by design quality in any place is no sort of narrow concern focused simply on what places look like. Instead, it encompasses a broad and holistic set of considerations that impact on how places, from buildings to cities as a whole, are used, how they're experienced, how they're appreciated by society at large, how well or how well different interventions subsequently impact on places, including on local economies, on society, on the environment, on the health of people, all things that we might put together under the broad category of place value, trying to achieve value through the places that we shape. Yet, as those aspirations and regulations have grown and proliferated over the years, corresponding critiques of what we produce have also tended to multiply. Now, while such critiques have fed the motivations and led to even greater attempts to regulate for better quality places, Europe has predominantly been building urban areas in a manner that many would argue has been profoundly unsustainable. And with social attitude surveys that tend to suggest there are also places that are disliked by many, perhaps the majority of European citizens. Now, this is locked into how urban areas are shaped, with interlinked systems of investment and knowledge and regulation producing patterns of development that can't easily be turned around. So American scholars, for example, have argued that almost every aspect of the built environment is in some way or other shaped by regulation. But too often these regulations are very limited in their scope, they're technical in their aspiration, they're not really generated out of any place-based vision, and they're imposed on projects and places without due regard to the outcomes. In Rome, for example, despite more than 2,000 years of experience in regulating design, new residential areas are often built without significant character or quality, despite the existence of a general urban development plan and comprehensive urban planning standards. In this case, like many others, formal regulations have simply not been sophisticated enough to deal with all the complexities of urban design when faced with private developers' inherent or intent on returning a sort of short-term profit at the expense of the long-term place value. But there's clearly a balance to be struck. There are circumstances where clear, simple, even quite crude rules can have a huge and beneficial impact. The negative reaction in the 1970s to the 59-storey Montparnasse Tower, which you can see in that image there on the skyline, led to a simple and ultimately successful 37-metre high limit across the whole of Paris to preserve the city's horizontal skyline and the dominance of its historic landmarks. And there are also examples where seemingly sophisticated formal rules have failed to create places of very much distinction. In Copenhagen, a city well known for its sort of careful nurturing of urban quality, almost everything that you can see in this image has been carefully controlled by a complex combination of planning and construction regulations. The result, despite the best intentions, is a scheme that feels dull, sterile and rather desolate. We also need to remember that the public sector is just one actor in how European cities are shaped. So as top-down and hierarchical forms of post-war government increasingly gave way to more market-led and networked forms of governance, a key feature of the neoliberal state has been the waning of direct power vested in the public sector, to be replaced instead by more diffuse and more indirect means of securing those public interests, those design quality aspirations, for example. So if previously government played the decisive role, then now decision making tends to be more negotiated and shared between key public and private actors, with the exact balance of power between parties endlessly shifting from place to place and over time. And this is fundamental because if the public sector can sufficiently shape the decision-making environment within which decisions on design and development are made, then without actually designing anything itself, it may be possible to secure design outcomes that meet all of its key public interest aspirations. Yet, as international experiences repeatedly demonstrate, this is not, or it doesn't tend to occur by chance or through regulation alone. Instead, it requires the construction of a system of urban design governance with the achievement of a holistic sort of design quality very much at its heart. In other words, you need to have a culture of quality. Now, all of this forms the backdrop to the Urban Maestro study that I briefly mentioned, which was fundamentally concerned with tracing and understanding what we might call non-regulatory means of engaging in the design of the built environment, or as our strapline phrased it, new governance strategies for urban design. So from the start of the project, it was a sort of genuinely collaborative project, thanks to all of those people on the slide here, although spanned a rather tumultuous period encompassing the run-up to and the delivery of Brexit in this country, which didn't really impact on the project, but also the first year of COVID, which most definitely did. So while the first year of the project looked like this, so lots of lovely visits around to different places of Europe and lots of lovely meetings and meals out with colleagues on the project, the second year looked pretty much like this, in common with much of the rest of the world at that time. In academic terms, Urban Maestro was a piece of qualitative cross-national comparative research and collective learning. It utilised 5 key approaches in the project, building on an earlier UK-based piece of research. We developed a European tools-based typology of urban design governance tools, and we constructed and tested that. This structured a Europe-wide survey of informal urban design governance practices, which was conducted primarily at the level of the different nation states across Europe. The survey launched a process of systematically compiling a cross-European panorama of innovative practices of urban design governance, which was published in the website urbanmaestro.org. And from that panorama, we conducted a series of case studies which focused in greater depth on particular practices of informal urban design governance in order to try and gain greater insight into their use and the use of these different practices. And these eventually informed a series of workshops with a diverse set of practitioner audiences around Europe between 2019 and 2020. Many of the latter ones being online rather than in person, unfortunately. Now, the conceptual basis for Urban Maestro is summarised in this rather complicated looking diagram. There's no time to fully unpack this, you'll be glad to know. Suffice to say that a range of conceptual distinctions are made in the book that resulted from the work. The most important of which is reflected in the subtitle of the book and concerns the power behind design governance and whether we're using soft or hard powers to influence design quality. As the exercise of government has become ever more multi-layered and complex, governments have had to familiarise themselves with a basket of new governance approaches that range from the application of more softer influencing powers, we can call those the carrots, to harder law-making powers, and we can call those the sticks. Rather than the aspirations of government, these represent the means by which government operationalises its ambitions. And there are many more options than might at first be apparent. Furthermore, as these journey from soft power to hard power tools, they activate tools that move from more informal encouraging of different activities to tools that are increasingly formal and more directive in nature. So, the different governance regimes that shape the built environment rely on different combinations of these hard and soft powers and formal and informal tools. And the qualities of the tools that result are often contrasting, with formal tools typically favoured because they are enforceable and notionally democratic, although with the downside that they also tend to be time consuming to create, and once they're created they tend to be quite inflexible. Across Europe as elsewhere, more network systems of governance have tended to usher in tools of urban design that sit outside of the formal statutory processes and shape the design decision-making environment through educating, through encouraging, through nudging stakeholders towards better design outcomes. And it's these tools that were the particular focus of the Urban Maestro project. To help us understand the range of tools available and their relationship, we developed, as I mentioned, a European typology. And the starting point for this was the reflection of two distinguishing features of all of the different tools. First, some tools focus primarily on building a culture within which design quality can be prioritised. And these sort of indirectly shape the processes of design, whilst others concentrate on directly shaping actual projects and places. Second, while the most widely used tools focus on formally directing decision-making processes relating to design and development processes, others use soft powers to informally influence decision-making from the broad culture of design to the specifics of actual projects. So when considered together, these distinguishing features create four potential categorizations of urban design governance tool. First, what we can call informal quality culture tools, such as the use of design awards. Second, informal quality delivery tools, such as the use of design competitions. Third, informal quality delivery tools, such as the use of design codes. And fourth, formal quality culture tools, although the last of the categories we can omit because we didn't find anything that fits into that particular category. So three major categories, into which we found that 9 key tool types would broadly fit, although none of these categorizations are hard and fast. Broadly, however, within each category there is a sort of transition from lesser to greater engagement, or from more passive to more active forms of intervention. Although again, whilst that's generally the case, it's not always so, and it will never be as clear cut as a diagram like this suggests. So what I'll do is I'll provide some examples of these different categories and the different tools in a moment. But before that, we need to recognise how the context for governance of design varies profoundly from place to place. And this idea was captured in the notion of urban design governance landscapes, because any locality is likely to be subject to overlapping urban design governance processes, depending on where and with whom the different competencies lie. So municipalities each have their own processes, networks of powers, or of course physical and social contexts. Greenwich there on the screen, that happens to be where I live in London. Overlying these might be a city or regional authority, in this case it's London and the GLA, while the nation state itself also exercises competence, in this case England. And those competencies impact locally on design and its governance. And in continental Europe, of course, we also have the EU, and that intergovernmental layer is being increasingly active in this space of design and urban design, not least through the new European Bauhaus, which is a big new cross-European initiative which is running at the moment. To illustrate this and some of the tools, in the book we mapped out 3 landscapes focusing on the cities of Lisbon, Vienna and London. And as it's where we currently all are, or most of us, at least those of us who are here in the room, I'm going to illustrate it by looking at the London case. Now, across most of London, responsibilities for the governance of urban design are split between 3 tiers of government. At the national level, over decades, policy on design quality has tended to swing quite wildly between support for more or less intervention on design. I'll come back to that in a little bit. The latest England-wide policy, called the National Planning Policy Framework, advocates a more hands-on and a sort of aesthetic vision for what's known as a sort of national drive for beauty. Big beauty initiative underway at the moment. This is backed by a whole series of guidance supporting various aspects of policy and setting out a series of normative design principles establishing the scope of that national concern. A range of arm's length executive agencies of government facilitate delivery, utilising a variety of often informal tools, such as the Building for a Healthy Life tool, which is a sort of rating system used by Homes England prior to releasing funding for social housing, for example. And a new unit called the Office for Place has been set up, or is actually in the process of being set up, and that's likely to make heavy use of these sort of more informal, persuasive powers of government. Turning to the citywide scale, whilst the mayor has a strategic role, each of the 3 mayors of London elected since the year 2000 have been interested in issues of design quality and also public realm quality, and have used a series of soft and hard powers to derive a greater citywide engagement and emphasis on these concerns. And this has been reflected in the comprehensive range of design policies that we find, for example, in the London Plan, to which the local boroughs need to have regard, and which the mayor uses himself to determine projects that he chooses to call in for mayoral determination. He supplements this agenda in London planning guidance, including recently on issues of the preparation of design codes for small sites. There's a whole suite of these different documents available. Transport for London is particularly powerful and sort of undertakes a wide range of analysis, rating using its Healthy Streets tool, and experimental projects such as low traffic neighbourhoods programs, and also uses financial incentivization tied to design standards, encouraged through design review. Transport for London also hosts an organisation called Urban Design London, which has offers quite extensive range of training programs for built environment professionals. And the Mayor also has a series of what he calls Mayor's Design Advocates, who deliver through design review processes and through directly enabling functions within local authorities. So working directly with local authorities, they try and work on particular projects to improve their quality. But although that sort of strategic level quality aspirations, if you like, are set from above, from the national and then the London-wide level, delivery is largely the responsibility of the 33 boroughs of London, the London boroughs. And they're responsible for managing most non-strategic streets and spaces, establishing local planning policy, conducting development management. They run award schemes, some of them. They have significant interest in large numbers of regeneration and increasingly social housing projects, which are used to encourage communities to engage in decision making and used to establish local exemplars of design quality. And in recent years, an increasing number of the local London's boroughs have required that design review happens for significant schemes, particularly those, and they tend to charge for that service. They have a charge which usually the developer pays for that service of design review. So while the sum total of all of these layers of tools, both formal and informal, is perhaps, it's certainly a lot more happens in London than it does elsewhere around the country. And perhaps because of that, it's maybe unsurprising that the quality of design in London is generally better than you find elsewhere around the country. So a project that I did a few years ago through an organisation called Place Alliance, which I'll talk about in a moment, Housing Design Audit for England, showed that design quality tends to be better in London than it is anywhere else around the country. And partly that's a result of these different layers of governance and these different types of tools, both informal and formal, being used across the city. Although despite that, of course, we have our fair share of truly horrible projects to demonstrate that there is a long way to go. And even if you have all of these things in place, that doesn't guarantee good quality design, and very often doesn't deliver it. Now, the 3 urban design governance landscapes featured in the book are just 3 of many thousands of such landscapes that we could have chosen, each representing particular cities or municipalities or places across Europe. Nevertheless, each of the chosen cities has been on a similar journey, one in which design quality is definitely on the agenda and has been, to greater or lesser degrees, prioritised in different ways, with varied reliance on the informal tools, reflecting their particular stage in the development of their own urban design governance infrastructure. What is clear is that where a strong national commitment exists, delivering design quality that has a powerful impact on either establishing or boosting local ambition tends to be very positive, with the ultimate aim of creating a system of layered competencies that can consistently bear down on securing that culture of quality, that elusive culture of quality. At the same time, delivery is almost entirely a local responsibility. And so local ambition is also key to building a sustained local commitment to design quality. All this complexity implies that understanding the collective European urban design governance landscape, even if such a thing exists, represents a challenging, perhaps an impossible task. And it's why the Urban Maestro project adopted an understanding of European practices based on the types of tools being used, rather than seeking to understand in detail what forms of governance were leading to which tools and which outcomes. The book dives into the resulting collective toolbox in some detail, presenting a sort of full panorama of European practices that the Urban Maestro project uncovered, and which can also be explored if anyone's interested at the urbanmaestro.org website. Now, while the website catalogues over 100 initiatives and tools, the book chose 27 of the most interesting or simply the most explanatory of the different tools, focusing on the 6 informal categories of urban design governance. And of these, the one that I know best is the one that I've been most closely associated with since 2014 when it was established, which is a thing called the Place Alliance. And this is an initiative in England which demonstrates a sort of networked, or it demonstrates in a networked and shifting and diffuse governance landscape the softest of soft design governance powers, and how a combination of persuasion and information, and most significantly analysis, can be utilised. So let's divert for a moment or two to just tell you the story of the Place Alliance as an example of these different tools in use. Now, the story starts long before the Place Alliance was even a twinkle in my eye, and reflects a sort of characteristic of British urban policy, which over the years has swung wildly, as I mentioned previously, at the behest of different national politicians, who you can see along this line, from total disengagement with any notion that the state might have a role in ensuring that the built environment should be well designed, to seeing it as a significant national policy concern. I first became aware of this when I was studying as an architect in the 1980s, a time when almost everything design related was argued to be entirely subjective by the then government at that time, and to be avoided at all costs by planners and politicians. But when studying to be a planner in the 1990s, a national debate was sparked by, of all people, the then Prince of Wales, now King Charles. And that began to change things. At first quite negatively, because there was a sort of quite a narrow stylistic debate, but increasingly positively as a new focus on urban design rather than style started to emerge. Now, with the injection from 1999 of the ideas of Richard Rogers about achieving a design-led urban renaissance in British cities, and the national design governance infrastructure that was set up in the wake of that, notably the influential Commission for Architecture and the Built Environment, CABE, that I already mentioned, a debate or a sort of decade-long period of prioritising design quality, and design quality being a national priority, had kicked off. And that's pretty much how things remain until until sort of the austerity policies kicked in from about 2010 onwards, and almost overnight, a concern for design quality as a national objective tumbled off the cliff and became a complete no-no again. Now, in recent years, or in the years that followed, there has been a degree of rebuilding, I suppose, initially, of the shattered organisations that in the austerity years really struggled to exist in this space because of the complete withdrawal of public funding. And the Place Alliance was launched in 2014 as a sort of collaborative alliance of like-minded organisations sharing a sense that there was a leadership gap that we needed to collectively try and bridge. And the Place Alliance was hosted here at UCL because I put my head above the parapet and proposed the initiative, but also because the university was seen as very much a neutral space, an honest broker that wasn't trying to undermine or usurp any other organisation or grab its territory. And at a time of austerity, when funding was tight, that was important. It meant, however, that the host organisation, UCL, had absolutely no formal role at all in so-called design governance, in the governance of urban design. Nevertheless, because myself and colleagues had just finished a study that I referred to earlier, which was a sort of decade-long examination of the work of CABE, the Commission for Architecture and the Built Environment, we naturally turned to some of the key tools that CABE had used to inform our initiative, the Place Alliance. Now, the earliest tools we used broadly fell under the category of persuasion. Initially, we hosted a series of cross-sector meetings here at UCL to try and build an alliance. We called these the Big Meets, and we hosted 10 of these between 2014 and 2020 as a way of bringing interested organisations together, from community organisations to big national organisations, to debate and discuss what how we could fill that leadership gap that had emerged, and to share initiatives and practices to build confidence around the importance of us having a collective voice in this space. And these sat alongside a series of working groups that focused in on particular subjects, on health, on public art. We had a whole series of them, which also helped us to curate the Big Meets. And from our various meetings and from those different working groups, we launched a series of campaigns in which we harness key organisations behind particular focused messages. For example, our early campaign around declining design capacity in local authorities across the country basically embarrassed national government into financially supporting a number of key design focused posts around the country, although only temporarily. Perhaps the most influential and successful of our campaigns was in 2020 to establish a new national design quality unit in England to take over the mantle of providing national leadership on the subject. So we developed and we launched a series of pamphlets to make this case. We had a series of high-profile events online, and that led to an announcement in 2021 from the government that they would also set up a new organisation called the Office for Place, and to take this whole agenda forward, exactly a decade after getting rid of the previous organisation, CABE. So the Office for Place now exists, although it hasn't been particularly effective so far because it's taken an awfully long time to get it set up. more familiar approaches for a university focused on doing our bit to help plug some of the national gaps in skills and knowledge and capacity through the use of information tools. So one of the greatest strengths of CABE when it had been around had been its use of online resources of different types. And with our with our sort of almost non-existent budget, we were operating on a shoestring. We didn't have the capacity to develop a whole series of online tools like CABE, but we did develop one called the Place Value Wiki, which brings together different empirical studies which link different aspects or attributes of design quality to different dimensions of value: economic, social, environmental and health. CABE also had a magnificent case study library of inspiring examples that they used to encourage emulation around the country. We explored updating this, although quickly found that the task would be beyond our very limited means. However, we are returning to that approach in at least one project at the moment, through our latest project, in fact, that is bringing together different case studies from across England that demonstrate the achievement of urban design quality in low value areas. So a particular project that we're looking at the moment. And in a final category in this field, specialist training, we launched an urban design summer school, or we relaunched CABE's old urban design summer school that they had championed, and we ran a series of those before passing that on to Urban Design London, who now run that summer school. And indeed, one of the philosophies of Place Alliance has been not to do anything that others are doing, just to try and fill gaps. So the fact that Urban Design London picked this up was great, because it meant we didn't have to do it anymore. So they're now running that annual summer school. The final category of tool that we use, the softest of soft category, is analysis. It's perhaps the one that universities are best placed to deliver. It's one that increasingly we have come to emphasise as others have taken up the slack elsewhere, namely the provision of research evidence to drive debate from informal policy through to shaping campaigns, to hold government and others to account. And we began by conducting research on design skills and capacity in the public sector to underpin a particular campaign in that area, before moving on to local political perspectives on design quality. We did a project on that. We did a project on the use of design review as a particular tool. We looked at evidence related to place value. We looked at the experience of people and their home neighbourhoods, particularly the experience of people during COVID. And we also looked at different tools and the spread of effectiveness of these different types of tools that I've been talking about. And most recently, we've come on to look at how design governance and can be used to more effectively deliver design quality in disadvantaged areas. But the most effective use, or the most influential tool, was the softest, which is the use of audit. And this was a study that we did called the Housing Design Audit that we published in 2020, and that I've already mentioned in the context of London. This was actually a national study that looked at the quality of housing developments across the country, and we used to argue the case that actually pretty much across the country the state of housing design is pretty mediocre or poor quality. And again, that has been used to embarrass not just government but also developers into more action on this front. So it has been one of the key influences underpinning a new, more recent interest in design at this level. As for the first time, for 10 years really, design quality is coming back onto the national agenda, care of this beauty agenda that the government is very much promoting at the moment. And increasingly, through the Office for Place, they're also promoting this idea of using these soft tools, these soft means, again, of promoting design quality through a whole series of programs of their own making. And in fact, the most recent study that we have launched is focusing on exactly these issues through a monitoring study that has been looking at appeals through the planning process, and which has shown for the first time that actually there's a better success rate of planning appeals for those schemes that are better designed than those that are poorly designed. So all of this effort for us and others has been having some impact, and one of our latest studies suggests that impact is positive, which seems to be a good thing. So, if you like, there is a ray of light that it has been having an impact. So, what does the Place Alliance case study and all of these different initiatives show? Well, I don't want to claim a larger influence than is due to us. We're just one amongst others. But first, I think there's been many influences on the recent trajectory of urban design governance practices across England, some more powerful than others. But nevertheless, I think, as already mentioned, the initiative shows how, in a sort of networked, shifting, diffuse urban design governance landscape, even non-governmental and non-market actors can play a decisive role in helping to shape national and local decision-making environments on design. In our case, achieved through informing decisions through injecting evidence, through challenging and holding decision makers to account when nobody else was, in this recent time of austerity, in coordinating and amplifying fragmented voices in this space, in providing a neutral space in the university that empowers all actors to speak, and helping to provide some leadership when there was none coming nationally. And if you're interested in this particular initiative, then placealliance.org.uk sets out all of these different initiatives in more detail. The Place Alliance project, of course, as I said, was only one initiative in this field. The Urban Maestro project looked at many more initiatives across Europe, including those that transcended both formal and informal quality culture and quality delivery tool categories. And in total, we identified, for example, 24 categories of soft urban design governance tool, as well as a range of allied financial mechanisms to which soft design strings can be added to incentivize design-led urban development and regeneration. So the aim was both to integrate the tools and, more importantly, to consider the collective lessons that might be drawn from their use. And the results of these discussions are summarised in the book that I mentioned through 20 propositions, including the vital question of how practices travel, or how transferable are the sort of practices that I've been talking about, these urban design governance practices across a continent, Europe, where the governance of the built environment is both diverse and complex. And as noted at the start of the presentation, practices of urban design governance under different names have been travelling since ancient times, as I said, but not always very successfully. And while Urban Maestro workshops revealed an obvious strong desire to learn from each other and to share experiences, the sheer complexity of practices that vary from country to region to city and even from municipality to municipality within cities often acts as a barrier to those practices travelling. Yet while such variations make the transfer of hard power tools particularly difficult, for softer power tools it's actually more easy to transfer the lessons, because they only really require initiative, ambition, and of course at least some resources to operate them. So they're quite different from the hard power tools that are, the barriers to transferring those are much more significant. It follows therefore that softer urban design governance tools are more transferable, and the most sophisticated regimes tend to deploy these tools, and they tend to deploy them in combination with the hard power tools, ultimately to deliver that culture in which design quality quite simply becomes the norm. So to conclude, soft power and hard power tools are not the same. Soft power tools require us to think differently about urban problems, including the design of places. Instead of requiring action, such powers are about nudging stakeholders in the right direction through influencing, convincing, perhaps even seducing them into action. This can limit their impact as they don't determine, if you like, the final actions that are going to be taken. But if used well, they can change long-term, or they can help to change long-term cultures and practices, and have the potential for a far greater impact on the quality of places than many formal regulations. And if you're interested in finding out more, the book explains how, which the book could be freely downloaded. It's an UCL Press book. You can either use this QR code or from the website. Thank you for listening to me, and sorry it took so long, and sorry you're all so tired.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you very much. Look, I'm wonder, can we just have a few questions maybe?
Yeah,
Well, at least one. Fantastic. In the room for Matthew and Natalia, if they're still there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you maybe stop the sharing the screen? That's
Yes, certainly. I'll stop share.
Lovely. Thanks.
There's a question over there.
Yes, Ricardo. Do you want to say your name?
It's Ricardo Perez. I study political science as my background. And I come from Colombia, from Medellin. I had two questions. The first one was you spoke in a moment about the austerity policies and how they meant an abrupt increase, at least in the UK, in the interest that or in the attention that authorities were giving to design quality. But then I wonder what happens when a country, we could say, that is permanently in austerity. I mean, or when a city is permanently in austerity, when they have no resources or money, or where they have so many problems that they're worrying about other more, let's say, critical issues than design.
Let me answer that first question first, because I'm dyslexic. I can never remember more than one question at a time. Yes, places in permanent austerity. Well, we could certainly include the UK in that category based on research, but I jest. I think in those cases, the sort of soft tools that I've been talking about really come into play even more than the hard tools, because you can use like in the last presentation that we heard, the enthusiasm and the dynamism of professionals and activists and communities are really what makes those sorts of tools work. I mentioned, for example, this audit that we conducted across the country. It was a huge piece of work, but largely that was conducted by volunteers. And we engaged those volunteers here and brought the whole thing together. But it was largely those volunteers that did all the auditing around the country. So I think these soft tools can really come into play in exactly the sort of context that you're talking about.
And my second question, I think it's a bit related, and I think the last part you said about the different patterns of tools makes me understand a bit more, but I still wonder between Lisbon, Vienna and London, which are capitals, you were speaking in that moment that where a strong national commitment exists, the tendency is very positive when these tools are applied. But then I think in the case of Colombia, for example, that usually planning policies that come from the central government are very disconnected with the peripheries.
Yeah.
And housing projects, for example, tend to be not only of very bad design quality, but also to impact negatively the livelihoods and the culture of those sites.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you study cities that are not capitals and if the tendency of quality still remains.
So in the book, we just study the 3 capitals, and we did that because they have multi-layered levels of governance that were quite interesting for us to look at and compare. We didn't look beyond that, and that's something that would be very interesting to do. But I think the influence of the national government varied quite a lot in the 3 that we looked at, from a sort of quite a top-down system that we have here to in Portugal a system where it's the opposite really, and then in Vienna there's somewhere in the middle that traditionally the central government has not really got involved in these issues because it's very much a sort of a federal system. But in recent years they've started to get involved, and they started to try and inject, if you like, an overall national vision to encourage the different sort of municipalities to take an equal and positive approach, because some were very engaged and others weren't. So I think the national government, when it is engaged, can have a very positive influence. Equally, in a country like this, when the national government isn't engaged or is negatively engaged, then it can have a very negative impact. So it's swings and roundabouts.
Thank you for the question, and thank you, Matthew. There is a question on the chat for Natalia's. Let me read it out loud, maybe. I don't know if you read it. First, how has and Esteban says that, how has your organization observed the transformation since the implementation, or let's say the partial implementation, of peace agreement in Colombia? Do you find the current environment more conducive for your work compared to the pre-peace era? And if so, can you tell us about changes that have positively or negatively impacted your organization?
Thank you. Okay. So we've seen changes, but it depends on the territory specifically. For example, in Nariño, we've seen places are more accessible. People from La Planada couldn't be there for like 10 years. Now they're coming back, but there's also new groups taking over. So it's like a temporary settlement, and now some other forces are taking over. Crops are being replaced. For example, coca leaf crops are in a slow right now, So people are not being able to survive or to by any means. Some places like Guaviare are thriving after many years of being forgotten and nobody visiting. There's a lot of international resources put into those places, so a lot of programs, but I feel very disconnected from each other.
Yes, I would say, and to add to what Natalia said, we've seen a huge change between 2016, 2018, when the peace agreement was coming to be, yeah, like to sign, and afterwards in our job, like now, where places where we work in the past, in the presidency of the republic, you cannot go now. Like the population has been completely displaced. So there's a few of those, and it's very sad because we lost complete contact with them, and they're now over the whole national territory because they had to leave. So as Natalia said, I would say the biggest change, it was at the beginning you could go to the territories to work with the communities, and now other actors have replaced those guerrillas that went to the civilian life and have now caused more terror and more war.
Yeah, so it depends on the municipality, but in some cases, I think it's are difficult times for them.
Is any other question from the room?
Yes.
Yeah, I had a question to Matthew. So, how can you define, or which are the tools to define or difference a good quality urban design between a bad quality? I told you, I asked you this question because, especially in Peru, where I come from, quality is defined by regulations, and regulations are also usually tend to ask designers to comply with a minimum. For example, the narrowest sidewalk can be 1.20 meters, but and in terms of these regulations, that's a good quality sidewalk. But if you analyze the sidewalk, it's better to have a wider one. So which are the tools, and where do we draw the line between good and bad quality design? If design in some perspectives is really subjective.
Ultimately, it's always a judgment, and that relates both to what we mean by quality, but also the tools that might be most valued in any different situation. I think what the research that I talked about showed, and I sort of briefly mentioned it at the end there, is that those places that use a combination of tools tend to be those that build over time this culture of quality, which ultimately leads to better quality built environment. So it may be, for example, that they have regulations, but that those regulations aren't just very crude numbers in a plan, but are also interpreted through a piece of guidance, maybe a design code or something, that there is a process of design review that sits alongside that, where professionals or others, community, can comment on proposals and can be part and parcel of that decision-making process. It may be that there are some of the very soft tools in use, like audits and so forth, that can help to understand that, you know, in a city, well, what is the right size for a sidewalk in different circumstances, and what works and what doesn't, and therefore what should our aspirations be? And you can do that through auditing and research and so forth. So it's not a simple answer that here's a tool that you should use and this is the right tool everywhere. It depends on the circumstances and depends what you're trying to achieve, but ultimately it's about, you know, working with those different tools and through a process of interpretation, I think.
Are there any other questions? Okay, Lindy.
So
I had a question about financial viability assessment.
Right.
I'm just wondering how this kind of like financialization of planning and design kind of might have negative impacts maybe, because I think financial or FBA viability assessments have kind of estranged the link between communities and developments in some cases. And I was just wondering if that has started to have an impact on some of the design choices that are being made, and that kind of, if the financialization is having negative impact on how communities perceive design.
No, I think the short answer is yes, absolutely. It does have an impact, and it has a huge impact on what is being proposed, who's proposing it, where it's being proposed, how it's delivered, and all sort right across from inception right through to delivery and long-term management. It has a massive impact on the types of places that are being created. We didn't look so much at those sort of processes. We were looking at how you can link different financial tools to different urban design governance tools. So, for example, whether an example that I briefly mentioned in the talk was in the UK here, if you want to get grant for a social housing scheme through Homes England, these days that is linked to a process of quality assessment of the proposal. So to release the money, you need to get to certain quality standards, which seems to me to be a good thing, a good linkage between that finance for the development and a quality aspiration, and wasn't always the case. A few years ago that didn't happen, and there's some very poor quality social housing as a result, which you might argue, whilst the social housing's been delivered, how long is it going to last? How long is it going to remain as good quality housing? So linking these two things can be a very worthwhile and productive thing in terms of delivering design quality, but often doesn't happen, and it isn't always the case that it might lead to good quality design. It depends on how they're linked and so forth.
Excellent. Anyone else? Otherwise, no?
Yeah. Is there any other burning question from the room? No, apparently not.
Okay, maybe I because we're conscious of time, so maybe I have a kind of a question for both of you, Matthew and Natalia. I'm not sure actually is a question, but it's a sort of also thanking you for the way you have addressed your research and your practice and your work. That's one. The first, it probably is an observation more than a question. The observation is the necessity to do longer longitudinal research. And I think you both, in different ways, of course, due to different stages of the career, show the different ups and downs, and not necessarily in the negative and in the positive way, but the different tactic of engagement with a multiplicity of actors, spaces, place, and questions. And I do think this is, for me, methodologically very important in addressing, and I'm not sure if I'm using correctly the word, but the culture of design in that sense, in the sense that design is not merely a product issue, but is certainly embracing a much wider cultural debate now, context specific, historically specific, value specific to a certain extent, so not universal. And so the traveling dimension maybe is a component that all of us as a planning discipline has to question in its own relevance, but also in its own methodological implication. But on the contrary, I think that all of us, and thank you for your research, stimulate very much to me the idea of bringing out design from a speculatively regulatory dimension to something that is embedded in a cultural realm. And the cultural realm is surely related to other forms of value that are embedded. Now, the question, and the provocative question, is that if this is correct, do you think is sufficient? And I'm trying to pose, I mean, especially in Europe, all this debate about culture and cultural dimension has also a negative side, or kind of a dark side of the cultural logic. I'm thinking, for example, of the rise of nationalisms, of the rise of specific boundary limit determination on that. So culture that basically justify the, you know, the construction of perimeter of a culture, a good culture, a bad culture, a culture that is legitimate to be called culture and another no. So the question, and I know cannot be answered, you know, in as a question, but the provocation that I have, is it something that you have experienced in both Colombia and in the work in the UK, European territory, of the limitation of the cultural dimension of research within design-oriented practice, design and architecture and planning? And why I'm also saying that, because specifically in your last work, Natalia, you were speaking about this idea of nature, of a completely different, and especially with indigenous community, which to a certain extent, in my experience and in my research, they also somehow tentatively try to at least provoke the authority of an agency of culture. And this is not a direct critique at all to the authority of the governance of planning at all, but simply saying that there are maybe some limitations on the way we consider culture as the only legitimate one to produce a determinate outcome. And in the current dimension of Europe, I see somehow this a limitation. Although I understand absolutely, and I found absolutely valuable the work you, Matthew, are doing on trying to continuously reconnect the generation of value, strategies, tactic with different authors in order to produce kind of a different freedom, but also different appreciation of the quality for the life and the living environment. So mine is a kind of a, and is a sort of thanking you for the time you spent with us, but is a maybe briefly, what is the limitation of this culture, and have you find something in this specifically in the European context? And with that, I really thank you very much. But I leave you just a spot to, you know, to take that provocation both.
Okay, you first. You can go, Matthew.
Okay. Well, I think what you said about longitudinal studies is very interesting. And when you've been around as long as me, that you see you think you've seen everything, and things come round and round again, and that can be interesting, but also sometimes a bit depressing. I think relating to the whole cultural question, I think inevitably the built environment is part of our culture, and we need to recognise that. But yes, of course, it has a dark side. But I think through helping to engage that, through having a national conversation or a local conversation about such issues, then we can maybe work through and not, you know, not get bogged down in that dark side. Go to the light rather than the dark side. So I think it's something that we need to recognise, and we can't necessarily just put to one side.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you.
On our side, I think in our practice, we've come to the notion of culture that's first, it's huge, right? And second, working with the communities, we figured that there's a lot of preconceptions about culture that we come with when we have to work with a new community. And some of them, I mean, we work with, like, we want to take out the most of their culture, what we think, like, they want to express, but sometimes these communities also have another imaginative notion of what they want their culture to be. So, like, these two preconceptions of culture, their culture itself and their imaginative culture, like, come into a lot of negotiations and dialogues, so they can also state what they are, what their culture is, let's say so, although it's a huge concept, and where they want to go. For example, in this last work we had in Nariño, we came to understand that what they wanted was to rephrase what they knew of their ancestors and take it and give it like the new modern, like like design. So it is indeed like a very limited conception, and I think we still have to work a lot on it, but for that you need time with different communities in territories.
And also let go of ego, architectural ego, because you come, you say this is perfect, this is beautiful, but at the end the people want something that they have seen all over the country as the ideal of what they want, and it's very apart from what they know as their culture. So it's a negotiation, but there are limits, I think, and other factors come, economic factor, the availability of materials, everything comes into play with that and affects the cultural realm.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Natalia. You started with the dark and now there is light. So I think this is a sign to stop the conversation and let you go off to some lunch or some breakfast. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Alex, for arranging the technicality. As I said, Matthew, I owe you a drink or something. So thank you very much. And good luck for both of your work. And you have the numbers of publication in different places to download. So Matthew, I've shared them. You can also share them with me, and I'll make sure that everybody in the room would have it. So thank you very much. And I wish you a good afternoon.
And thank you, Camila, for
Thank
being
you.
a commissioner in these
Okay.
events. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.